All right, guys, this is FunBoys Fantasy Football League Webcast number 1. I'm here with Tunis. He is the team manager for Team Power. You know, the Old Spice commercial, like a man. And we're here to give you guys a little review on how our fantasy draft went. So let's start with depth. What positions we felt were really strong this year and what ones we thought were weak. What do you think about the wide receiver position this year?
Here's the thing. I remember last year specifically saying I need to get one of the top couple of receivers because there really is such a big drop-off in the top receivers. This year it just seems so deep. If you have a number 1 or a number 2 receiver on a team, they're productive fantasy-wise. So wide receiver this year I really felt was very deep. It was something I was going to try to hold off on drafting personally. So,
you know what, guys? And the thing is, other than Andre Johnson, I really don't think that there's a wide receiver that stands out in the first or second tier. You have great wide receivers this year. Randy Moss was a top 3 wide receiver. I don't necessarily know if he'll produce like that because we do remember that 4 touchdown game he had last season, which was just, made his numbers skyrocket in value. So that seems like it's a bit overrated, and he's having some issues this year. What other wide receivers do you think out there are really going to be, on a level playing field?
Here's one that hits home because I drafted Calvin Johnson at the end of the second round, and he's a guy who, if he comes out and performs like he did 2 years ago, that's a steal because you're talking a top 7-8 fantasy player.
He was hurt most of the year. If
he comes out and plays like he did last year where he got hurt and really didn't produce much, then I kind of screwed myself. So that's a gamble I took.
I like risk taking.
Does healthy Calvin Johnson, productive Calvin Johnson show up, or does injured, non-existent Calvin Johnson show up? So we'll see.
And the only thing about Calvin Johnson is he plays for Detroit. And as great of a talent I think he is, he might be just as good as Andre Johnson talent-wise, but he's got no one on that team. No one to help him block for coverage while he's trying to run down the field. Granted he can burn most people, but it's nice if you can get that buffer room in, right?
Absolutely.
But let's move on. Wide receiver, weak this year.
Running back.
Oh, excuse me, running backs, yeah. Weak this year. You get top 5 and then maybe huge drop-off after that.
I agree with you 100%. And it's not so much the running backs as it is...
That's fine.
As it is the system. A lot of teams have gone to a 2-back system now. So the days of getting a Barry Sanders or an Emmitt Smith or somebody who's going to take every single carry for your team, they've pretty much disappeared. You only have a couple guys like that left, and those are the ones that are ranked top 5 in the league. You get guys who are probably first round backs, but they're a little ranked a little lower. You got guys like D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart who are both spectacular, but they're splitting carries. So is it really worth the gamble fantasy-wise and go after those guys? I don't know.
Yeah, and you know what? When you have a multiple back system now, a lot of those teams are even splitting a lot on the goal line.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't seldom are you getting teams now where they just have a guy who's dedicated in the red zone.
Agreed. And what that equals is you're going to get good depth. You're going to get good players later in the round, good running backs later in the round, like Brendan Jacobs, for example. I think I drafted him 9th or 10th round. That's a great 9th or 10th round pick, but he's not going to put up number 1 back type of numbers for me in fantasy.
Yeah, and that also makes things very tricky too, I would think, because you don't know who that week is going to get the ball. It's not like it's planned. It's very spur of the moment. If I'm running, we know Sidney Rice is the back for the Ravens, right?
Ray Rice,
excuse me. I'm awful with names, by the way. I'm going to do that probably often. Ray Rice is the lead back for the Ravens. However, they're in a 3-back system where they got 2 very good backs behind them.
I agree. I like the Ray Rice pick. He's got the most potential. But if the Ravens, things are clicking, they're going to start splitting carries to keep them fresh. It's a risk.
Was he the number one last year, or was it McGahee?
It started off McGahee, I believe, and then Rice kind of took it over. So, I mean, he was the steal of the draft last year, without question.
He just overshadowed him. You know what? I'm going to disagree with that. You know who I think was the steal of the draft as running back last year? Your very own Rashad Mendenhall put up like 30 points twice for me.
Once was against me, Adam, and you picked him up about 8 minutes before the game started. Thanks.
Thank you, Rashad.
So the days of the one-back system are nearing an end. If you look at the first few backs taken in the draft, you have, Ray Rice was up there, but you have Chris Johnson, Adrian Peterson, Maurice Jones-Drew. Those are all guys that are, for the most part, taking 90-95% of the carries for their team. And they're the most productive fantasy-wise. So.
Yeah, they should put up great numbers. Tight end, very strong.
Very strong, very strong. You have guys, you got your Dallas Clarks, your Wittens, you have your, Antonio Gates. They're not going to put up that many more points than you're going to get from a guy like Greg Olsen or, Jermichael Finley from Green Bay. I think there's a lot of depth at tight end. I think tight ends are becoming a staple in the passing offense now. A few years ago where tight ends were mostly used as blockers or things of that sort. Now they're receiving tight ends everywhere. So
yeah, a lot of them are receiving. There's a lot more offensive production outside of your tight ends now.
There's a lot of talent mismatches. You get a running back, or you get a linebacker up against a tight end nowadays, and
sometimes
lights out.
You see tight ends. They don't run as many receivers on the team anymore. They'll put an extra tight end out on the field, won't they?
Absolutely. Especially if you see a young quarterback. The safest patterns, the best guy to throw to, a go-to guy for a young quarterback, is always his tight end. So if you're looking at a team like the Jets or even the Dolphins, I'm surprised they don't get more production out of their tight ends.
And then there's your other positions. Kickers, who cares? Unless you get, maybe a 1 or 2 kicker, you might get an average of, 10, 12 points a game. And what's that for?
What kicker am I going to take today? Who cares? You got, your elite kickers and your worst kicker in the league. They're all good for 10 points, and one week they might put up 20. And then you have your two sides of the spectrum. Do you take a kicker on a crappy team because they can't score touchdowns, so they got to kick field goals? Or do you take a kicker on a good team because they're going to score a lot, so they're going to be kicking extra points and field goals and all this? Kicker's irrelevant. I didn't even draft a kicker this year. I know No Grass on the Field didn't draft a kicker this year.
No Grass on the Field never drafts a kicker. He always picks up a kicker last minute. We'll forget about you for now, No Grass on the Field, but don't worry, we got you later in the segment here. Moving on, defense. We were talking, Justin made an excellent point about the defenses here. If you want to recap that, offense seems to be the way to go now in football, but not necessarily in fantasy. If you take the two teams that made the Super Bowl last year, they had a couple of the lower-ranked defenses in the league. What's your explanation fantasy-wise for those teams?
The way I look at it is you get a team like the Packers who are ranked, top 3 in defenses in fantasy. They're ranked very lowly in the NFL in terms of actual defense. And my reason for this is the Packers, they're going to go and they're going to put up 30 points every game. So what does the other team have to do? They have to pass a lot more. It's going to create turnover situations. It's going to give them opportunities to return interceptions for touchdowns. The other team's going to be kicking off a lot more because it's such high-scoring game. So it's going to give you return possibilities. And that equals fantasy points.
That's an excellent point. And I never really put that together because I grabbed Green Bay. Probably, I think it was maybe 9th round, but I think I grabbed them as one of the earlier defenses. People said, the Jets are pretty much going to be the best defense in the league. They were the best defense last year. They got better this year. But the thing is, they're not going to be putting up a lot of points because, Sanchez, still a new quarterback, really made a lot of mistakes, had a ton of interceptions last year. They're not going to be a high-scoring team. They are going to be making some stops, but I don't see them producing